I've dealt before with presuppositional apologetics and the transcendental argument specifically, but due to Said and Bruggencate's version of it being a sort of a new topic since the Reason Rally, I wanted to address his version specifically. Said's position can be summarized as follows. 1. We don't know everything, only God would know everything. 2. It is possible that among the things we don't know, there is something that falsifies everything we currently believe. 3. Therefore, we cannot be certain about anything. 4. The only way to have knowledge is to either know everything, to be God, or to have revelation from someone who knows everything, in other words, from God. 5. It would be possible for an all-knowing and all-powerful God to reveal certain things in such a way that we could be 100% certain about those things. And 6. Therefore, the only way for us to know anything is if God exists and gave us the possibility to know things. Without God, you could not know anything. To this, he also adds the supposed fact that in order for there to be absolute invariant immaterial laws of logic, an absolute invariant immaterial God must exist. In other words, you need to assume that God exists to even make any logical argument whatsoever. He also claims that science presupposes the existence of God because science depends on the uniformity of nature. The only way to account for the uniformity of nature, he argues, is if this principle was set up by God. He compares this to a town in which there is a daily lottery, and if someone wins the lottery every single day, you would expect it to be rigged. In the same way, if natural laws act the same way every single day, apart from miracles, it also needs to have been set up that way. He also claims that in order to have absolute laws of morality, there must be an absolute lawgiver. His final claim is that every person already knows that God exists. In other words, that there are no actual unbelievers. There are only people who acknowledge that God exists and people who refuse to acknowledge that, who suppress the truth. So in summary, the only way to account for truth, knowledge, logic, science and morality, you need to presuppose that God exists and reveal at least aspects of these things in such a way that we can be absolutely certain about them. Without doing that, absolute global skepticism applies and you cannot know or account for anything at all. Obviously, this is one of the worst forms of apologetics possible, but it is a way to argue for theism that many atheists are simply unprepared for. So it happens a lot that when I see atheists argue against this form of apologetics, that I'm somewhat disappointed in their way of handling it. So therefore I will try to provide you with a strong method to counter this kind of argumentation. In fact, I have tons and tons of objections regarding Sai's argument, but I will focus on some of the key issues. Let's picture this in the form of a hypothetical conversation between me and Sai. Sai usually starts with the following question. Is it impossible for God to exist? Most people tend to say yes, because if one has no reason to believe that X is impossible, you need to assume that it's possible for X to exist. However, I reject that line of reasoning. Questions like this need to be meaningful and applicable. After all, words are merely a way to convey a message, but we don't believe in words themselves or weigh their possibility. But instead it's about the concepts that those words refer to. After all, you are not asking me if it's possible for the word God to exist, but you are asking me if it's possible for the concept that the word God refers to actually exists as a real entity. But in order for it to be meaningful and applicable to weigh the possibility of an entity X, one needs to have some understanding of X. If you don't, then the question is meaningless. For example, if I would ask you the question if it's possible for a yellow quantum whisperer to exist, then you need to understand the concept in question in order to answer my question. But I can only give you some random attributes, namely, it's yellow, it resides on a quantum level and it whispers. Now any of those attributes individually we understand, but that understanding goes out of the window as soon as we combine those attributes. Basically, as soon as we talk about yellow and whispering on the quantum level, those things no longer can have anything to do with how we previously understood them. They essentially become new attributes. Basically, it becomes an unknown form of yellow and an unknown form of whispering. The same applies to a supernatural mind that created the natural world. I can understand supernatural in the sense of not being natural. I do have understanding of what a mind is, and I do have understanding about creating. But I do not understand an entity in which those things are combined, just like with the yellow quantum whisperer. Basically, the concept of God gets described with words that lose their meaning as soon as they are combined. Moreover, I regard many of the individual attributes of the God concept as meaningless in the first place, such as omnipotence, omniscience, all goodness, etc. I already have a video on the attribute of omnipotence entitled God's Meaningless Attributes Part 1 Omnipotence. So when you ask if it's possible for God to exist, you are asking me to weigh the possibility of an entity that I cannot conceive of and do not understand. In other words, I do not understand your question and therefore cannot answer it. Therefore, I have no reason to accept that the existence of God is possible. But just to allow you to make your apologetic argument, I will say that it is possible so that we can move on to the next point.